The Boleyn sisters, Mary and Anne, were part of one of England's most influential and controversial families during the 16th century. Their lives were deeply entwined with the political and religious upheavals of the Tudor court, and they both played key roles in shaping English history, particularly through their involvement with King Henry VIII. Mary Boleyn was born around 1499 to Thomas Boleyn and Lady Elizabeth Howard. She was the eldest of 3 surviving children, with Anne Boleyn and George Boleyn as her younger siblings. The Boleyn family, though not of ancient noble lineage, was on the rise during the early 16th century. Thomas Boleyn, Mary's father, was a skilled diplomat and courtier, while her mother came from the powerful Howard family, making Mary and her siblings part of the English aristocracy. Little is known about Mary's early life, but it is likely that, like her sister Anne, she was educated in the typical fashion of noble girls of the time. This would have included training in the arts of music, dance, and languages, along with the customs of courtly life. The Boleyn family was ambitious, and the children were raised with the expectation that they would play important roles at court. Mary at the French court, 1514–1520. In 1514, at around age 15, Mary Boleyn was sent to France as part of the entourage of Princess Mary Tudor, who was marrying King Louis XII of France. This was a common practice for noble families, as service at a foreign court provided both political alliances and cultural refinement for young women. When King Louis XIV died shortly after his marriage, Mary remained in France, serving Queen Claude, the new queen consort and wife of Francis I. During her time at the French court, Mary gained a reputation for being lively, attractive, and flirtatious. Some reports suggest she may have become involved in romantic entanglements, including an affair with King Francis I. However, this claim comes primarily from later sources and is difficult to verify. Francis reportedly referred to her as his English mare, an unflattering reference that implied she was sexually promiscuous, though whether this was true or simply court gossip remains a matter of speculation. Return to England and marriage, 1520–1524. Mary returned to England around 1520, possibly due to rumors of her behavior in France. Upon her return, she was quickly married to Sir William Carey, a courtier and a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. Carey was well connected, and the marriage aligned with the Boleyn family's ambitions. The couple lived at court, where Mary continued to serve as a lady-in-waiting, first to Queen Catherine of Aragon, and later to Anne Boleyn when she became queen. It was during her marriage to William Carey that Mary is believed to have begun her affair with King Henry VIII. The exact timing of the affair is uncertain, but it likely took place in the early 1520s, perhaps around 1522. This relationship was conducted discreetly, as Mary was a married woman, but it was well known at court. Unlike her sister Anne, who would later play a central role in England's political and religious history, Mary's relationship with Henry was more fleeting. The affair ended by 1525, possibly due to the king's growing interest in Anne Boleyn. While Mary was involved with the king, she bore 2 children, Catherine Carey, born around 1524, and Henry Carey, born around 1526. Although William Carey is recognized as their father, some historians have speculated that Henry VIII might have fathered one or both of the children, especially considering the timing of Mary's affair with the king. However, no conclusive evidence exists to prove this theory, and the children were officially recognized as Carey's offspring. Widowhood and the Boleyn family's rise, 1528 and 1534. In 1528, Mary's husband, William Carey, died suddenly of the sweating sickness, leaving Mary in a difficult financial position. Despite her former relationship with Henry VIII, she received little help from the king. It was her family, particularly her sister Anne, who by then was vying for the king's hand in marriage, who supported her. Anne secured a position for Mary's son, Henry Carey, in the royal household, and her father, Thomas Boleyn, ensured that she was provided for. During this period, Anne Boleyn's influence at court grew, as Henry VIII's determination to marry her led him to seek an annulment from his wife, Catherine of Aragon. Anne's ambition and refusal to become Henry's mistress transformed her into the focal point of England's political and religious transformation. Mary, however, remained on the sidelines of these developments, continuing to serve her sister and observing the dramatic rise of the Boleyn family. Second marriage and estrangement from family, 1534. Mary's second marriage to William Stafford was a turning point in her life and marked her break from the ambitions of her family. In 1534, Mary secretly married Stafford, a soldier and gentleman who had no title or wealth. This marriage was a love match, but it shocked her family, particularly her father and sister Anne, who had expected Mary to make a more advantageous marriage, given the Boleyn family's newfound power and influence. When her marriage to Stafford became known, Mary was effectively cast out of the family circle. Anne, now queen, was furious, and the Boleyns refused to support Mary financially. She wrote to Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII's chief minister, explaining her circumstances and asking for help, stating that she married for love and not ambition. Despite this, Mary and Stafford were forced to live quietly in the countryside, far from the intrigue of the royal court. Later, years and death, 1534–1543. After her estrangement from the Boleyn family, Mary lived a relatively obscure life. Her sister Anne's spectacular fall from grace and execution in 1536 marked the dramatic end of the Boleyn family's prominence. Both Anne and their brother, George Boleyn, were executed on charges of treason, adultery, and incest, leaving Mary as the last surviving Boleyn sibling. Mary inherited some property following the deaths of her siblings and father and her children. Catherine and Henry Carey were eventually well placed in society, thanks to their connections with the royal family. Mary herself, however, lived a quieter, more private life. She died on July 19, 1543, at the age of around 44, largely forgotten by the court where she had once been a central figure. Anne Boleyn was born around 1501, likely at Blickling Hall in Norfolk or Hever Castle in Kent, to Thomas Boleyn and Lady Elizabeth Howard. The exact date and place of her birth are uncertain due to the lack of precise records. Anne was the second of 3 surviving children, with her elder sister Mary Boleyn and younger brother George Boleyn. The Boleyn family, though of relatively modest origins, was on the rise within the English aristocracy. Her father, Thomas Boleyn, was a talented diplomat and courtier, and her mother came from the powerful Howard family, positioning the Boleyn children for advancement in the English court. Anne's early education would have been typical for a noblewoman of her time, focused on accomplishments that would befit her for life at court. She likely learned French, music, dance, needlework, and the customs of courtly life. Her sharp intellect and striking appearance would later make her stand out in a court filled with accomplished women. Anne at the Burgundian and French courts, 1513 and 1522. At around 12 years old, Anne was sent to the court of Margaret of Austria in the Netherlands, where she served as a maid of honor. Margaret's court was one of the most refined in Europe, and here Anne received an education that far surpassed what she might have received in England. She studied French culture, literature, music, and philosophy, and her time in the Burgundian court gave her a deep understanding of European politics and diplomacy. After a year in the Netherlands, Anne moved to France, where she joined the household of Queen Claude, the wife of King Francis I, around 1514. In France, she spent nearly 7 years immersed in the vibrant cultural and intellectual life of the French court. This experience honed Anne's wit, style, and manners, making her a sophisticated and worldly young woman by the time she returned to England around 1522. Anne also became fluent in French and was exposed to Renaissance humanism, which would later influence her religious and political views. Returned to England and rise to prominence, 1522-1526. Upon her return to England, Anne joined the court of Queen Catherine of Aragon, serving as a lady-in-waiting. Her sister, Mary Boleyn, had already made an impression at court, but it was Anne who would quickly rise to prominence. She soon attracted attention for her dark hair, olive skin, and graceful, elegant demeanor, which set her apart from the fair English beauties typically favored at court. She was also known for her sharp mind and quick wit. Around 1525, Anne caught the eye of Henry Percy, the heir to the Earl of Northumberland, and the two became romantically involved. However, their relationship was thwarted by Cardinal Thomas Wolsey, Henry VIII's powerful chief minister, likely at the king's behest. Percy was forced to break off the engagement, and Anne, humiliated, withdrew from court for a time. It was around this time that Anne also captured the attention of King Henry VIII, who had grown tired of his long-standing marriage to Queen Catherine of Aragon. Henry's interest in Anne, however, was unlike his earlier liaisons with women such as Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister. Anne refused to become his mistress, setting herself apart with her refusal to surrender to the king's advances. Instead, she demanded nothing less than marriage. This bold stance was revolutionary for a woman at court, and it dramatically changed the course of English history. The King's Great Matter and the Break from Rome, 1527 to 1533. By 1527, Henry VIII was desperate for a male heir, something Catherine of Aragon had been unable to provide despite several pregnancies, all but one of which ended in miscarriages or stillbirths. Their only surviving child, Mary, was a girl, and Henry believed he needed a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. He became convinced that his marriage to Catherine was cursed by God because she had been his brother Arthur's widow, and he sought an annulment from the Pope. Anne Boleyn was at the center of what became known as the King's Great Matter, Henry's quest to annul his marriage and marry Anne. The Pope, however, refused to grant the annulment, partly due to pressure from Catherine's powerful nephew, Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. As the years dragged on, Henry became increasingly frustrated, and Anne's position at court grew more precarious, as she continued to hold out for marriage while facing hostility from Catherine's supporters. Anne's refusal to become Henry's mistress and her insistence on marriage only increased her allure for the king. She played the role of the unattainable, flirtatious woman, engaging with Henry through letters and brief court meetings, where she charmed him with her intelligence and charisma. At the same time, she became deeply involved in the intellectual and religious debates of the time, aligning herself with reformist ideas that were critical of the Catholic Church. By 1533, after 6 long years of legal and political wrangling, Henry had grown tired of waiting for papal approval and took matters into his own hands. He broke with the Roman Catholic Church and declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, enabling him to annul his marriage to Catherine without the Pope's consent. This act, known as the English Reformation, transformed England both religiously and politically. Anne's influence over Henry during this period cannot be understated. She supported religious reform and the promotion of evangelical ideas, which criticized the excesses of the Catholic Church and called for a return to simpler, scriptural faith. Anne's intellectual engagement with these ideas, along with her beauty and allure, helped her maintain Henry's favor during this tumultuous time. Queen of England, 1533 to 1536. In January 1533, Anne secretly married Henry VIII, and by the summer of that year, she was crowned queen. On September 7, 1533, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Elizabeth, who would later become one of England's greatest monarchs. However, Anne's failure to produce a male heir immediately put her in a precarious position. Henry had gone to extraordinary lengths to marry Anne in the hope of securing a male heir, and Elizabeth's birth was a bitter disappointment to the king. Despite the initial joy of Elizabeth's birth, Anne's fortune soon began to decline. She suffered several miscarriages in the following years, and her inability to bear a son strained her marriage to Henry. The king's attention began to wander, and by 1535 he had fallen in love with Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. Anne's reign as queen was also marked by political infighting and personal animosities. She had many enemies at court, including powerful figures like Thomas Cromwell, who had once been her ally but later turned against her. Anne's strong-willed and outspoken nature alienated many, and her role in the downfall of Queen Catherine and the break from the Catholic Church made her a target for those who remained loyal to the old religion. Downfall and execution, 1536. By early 1536, Anne's position at court had become increasingly tenuous. She suffered another miscarriage in January, reportedly of a male child, further devastating Henry's hopes for a son. The king, now infatuated with Jane Seymour, began to seek a way out of his marriage to Anne. In May 1536, Anne was arrested and charged with treason, adultery, and incest. The charges included accusations of inappropriate relationships with several men, including her own brother, George Boleyn. Historians believe the charges against Anne were fabricated, likely orchestrated by her political enemies, including Thomas Cromwell, who saw Anne's fall as an opportunity to align himself with Jane Seymour and secure his own position. The trial was a spectacle, with Anne's enemies determined to see her convicted. Despite her spirited defense, Anne was found guilty of all charges. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed by beheading at the Tower of London. She faced her death with remarkable courage and composure, delivering a speech in which she acknowledged her fate but made no admission of guilt. Her execution marked the tragic end of a woman who had once captivated a king and changed the course of English history. The Boleyn sisters' stories are emblematic of the precariousness of life in the Tudor court, where the personal ambition, politics, and royal favor could determine one's fate. Anne's legacy, in particular, endured through her daughter, Elizabeth I, who reigned from 1558 to 1603. Elizabeth's rule marked a golden age for England, solidifying Anne Boleyn's place in history, not only as a tragic figure, but also as the mother of one of the most important monarchs in English history. Mary's legacy is more subtle, but her descendants also had notable roles in English history. Her son, Henry Carey, became the first Baron Hunsdon, and her granddaughter, Lettice Knollys, was a prominent figure at Elizabeth I's court. Together, the Boleyn sisters are remembered as figures whose fates were shaped by the ambitions and desires of a tumultuous royal court, with Anne's fall marking one of the most dramatic episodes in Tudor history.